Today's conversation is sponsored by the Billy Keels Advisory Program. If you want to learn more about how to make your 9 to 5 optional, just go to billykeels.com/advising. Once again, that's billykeels.com/advising. You created an amazing idea. Now what? This is part of the ongoing questions that you're going to constantly have when you're a successful corporate employee, corporate executive. You're looking to go out and also you found this, what you call side hustle today, but you know in the back of your mind that this is something that you're testing, that you're starting, and at the same time you want to be able to grow, you want it to be able to scale. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But this is very similar. This is a very similar path that I went down. Got to a point where I understood, I created an idea, and this idea I got to a point, I said, hey, well, listen, now what? What am I supposed to do now? So if I think about where we were, this is probably towards the end of it was about 2010, 2012, something like that. I know that I was not 40 years old yet. Time flies, But somewhere between 2008 and 2012, I talked about before where I had this idea that started, and this came as a result of a conversation that I had with one of my bosses. And this whole thing is like, once you identify your profitable side hustle, and this is something that I talked about in episode 439, you may not necessarily take action. Like, I literally spent 48 months, 4 years from 2008 to 2012, when I had a very emotionally painful missing my son's 3rd birthday party event that actually kicked me into action. So it wasn't until I had that trigger event in 2012 that I actually took this wonderful idea that I had already identified and started to put it into action. So that eventually happened in 2013. And so this is something that happens to you very frequently when you are a perfectionist, someone who has been in the corporate world, and you got good grades in high school, middle school, high school, college. And then you got the good job, you made a lot of money, and you kept repeating the same process that you'd done when you were younger. You got the recognition, you got the reward, and you just keep working harder and harder and harder and harder. And that's what you know. This is classic perfectionist. People like me now, recovering perfectionists. So this is why I'm sharing part of this episode with you, which is to realize that you've created an amazing idea and you're feeling stuck, and you're now saying, now what? What are you supposed to do? And just like me, after finally thinking about it for 4 years, finally getting into action in the 5th year, like deep down inside, there's like, I wanted to continue to be right. So that's why it took me so long to figure out what my thing was. And then at the same time, there was really this whole point of saying, I've got to keep this successful run up. There was a fear of being anything other than successful in whatever it was that I did. I now know that that's a fallacy, and you're always going to run into moments where you don't get an A on the test, or you have an opportunity to have a failure event, and you have an opportunity to learn and grow and do that faster. And so what I started realizing was, once I started taking action in 2013, and I know I've talked about this before, it was at that point, we're talking, this is now over a decade, but it was getting the early success, replicating that success, maybe making a couple errors along the way, losing some money along the way, gaining a little bit more scar tissue, if you will. But the thing is once I got to my thing, and that was real estate. And for you, it may be something, maybe it's real estate, or maybe it's some type of tangible asset, or maybe you're really good at coding and you want to create your own company, or you want to create your own online business, or maybe you're excellent with selecting talent and you want to get into the consulting business. Whatever it is, you're having this itch inside that corporate is not going to be able to scratch. Similar thing for me. It just happened that I found real estate. And so once I found real estate, continued to go over and over and over, had my idea. And then I got to a certain point where I was literally drowning in success. And when I say success, because I was measuring it by dollars, like the number of dollars that were coming into a bank account or a series of bank accounts. And so having that idea, then taking it into action, kind of testing it, starting it, and then eventually drowning in success, I started realizing like, oh my goodness, like and I guess before I started drowning in success, I just tasted, like dabbled a little bit in the waters, right? Because you want to test things first. So I tested, And I realized that this was working. This was something that I enjoyed doing. The idea was there. And so then I wanted to start to build more assets. And so I started to stack assets, which means I included more assets in my portfolio. I started gaining more experience. I started getting some things, a lot more things right than I was getting wrong, building a team. And what eventually started as a hobby, you can begin to now see as your path. This is what's going to create the optionality in your life. This business idea, which starts as a side hustle and eventually grows to something else, this side hustle was now becoming the path to my optionality, was to say, okay, I like corporate, but like this is really giving me a lot of energy. I'm loving this, and I'm actually having a direct impact on other people directly, not through my company, but like with my very teeny tiny small company. And so this is where you start to understand that when you see this path down or out, or one that can create this optionality for you, you start to say, okay, well, I got to double down. And so I did a very similar thing. It was like I got to a point where I was like, all right, well, this is working well, but how can I do more of this? How can I collapse some of the time frames? Because it was really cool and it was great, and the financial reward was fantastic, and at the same time, it was pretty exhausting. And so I got to a point where I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so when I got to the point and saying, okay, this is a really good idea, I started getting some ideas, building the scar tissue, as I mentioned to you before. But then I started saying, okay, well, now what? What am I supposed to do? So I realized that there was more than likely a much better, more efficient way to do this asset stacking that I was looking to do in real estate. Or maybe you want to build your online business much faster, or you want to learn from someone else who's understood what's going on, so that you can get to whatever you believe is the result that you want to get to, so you can get there faster to test it and see if this hypothesis was actually the right one. Well, what I decided to do at that certain point in time was say, okay, well, look, I've got a lot of the theoretical knowledge, I'm getting some practical knowledge, but how can I combine these two and actually get to getting to my optional date faster? Like I wanted to be able to know, hey, listen, I can stay in corporate. I like it, but at the same time, I want to be able to do something else. So I decided I was going to go online. I found someone who at the time I really wanted to go into multifamily real estate. So I found someone who was just a couple steps before me. And I started watching his YouTube videos, and I started listening to his podcast. And eventually I got closer and closer, and got a chance to get on a phone call with him. Once I got on a phone call with him, starting finding out more things. And then he provided an option, like in this case, it was a guy, who provided different opportunities for me to then invest, buying courses, stuff like that. And so eventually I got to a point where I got a chance to speak with him. I joined his community. And so it was really giving me a much better idea as to, okay, well, is this the person that I want to be able to learn from, so that I can get to my result even faster? Because that's what I was really focused on. I'm a lot more focused on the process now, but this is just to kind of share where my mindset was at that time. Maybe your mindset is there now, but the idea was I wanted to get to the result much faster. Like I said, now focused much more on the process. So eventually got to a point, and at this point, I've been following this community and a part of his programs for probably a little bit over a year or so. And there was an opportunity to work one-on-one with this guy. And so once I got to find out more about what it was like to work one-on-one, I realized like the investment was almost six figures. Like, and when I say almost six figures, like almost $100,000. Yes. And so for me at that point in time, it really, really scared me. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not worthy. It wasn't, I guess it was the money for sure. But there's also this mindset, especially when you're in a corporate role. And I was thinking to myself, okay, well, corporate's done this, corporate's done that. Corporate, if I do this, I've got to figure out a way for the company to do it, and maybe this was going to work. And I started having all this negative self talk. But I knew deep down inside, like this was the thing for me, because I knew that when I bet on myself, quote unquote, like I do that in air quotes, bet on myself, that there was no better bet that I could make. There was not going to be any better return on investment. But of course I had the nervousness that, was this going to work? Was I going to work? What happens if it doesn't work? And all of that kind of negative self-talk. But the idea was, I finally got to a point where I said, you know what? This is the moment. Now it's for me. I wasn't absolutely crystal clear on what the outcome was going to be, but I knew that after following this person, knowing where I wanted to go, having had some early successes, having had the theoretical knowledge, had started to put that into practice, that it was just a matter of some fine tuning, some expert insight to help me, because ultimately it was up to me to be able to get the result. And that's what I was focused on. And so, yes, I made the leap and I went out and I decided to do coaching, and it was for a 1-year period. And that 1-year period ended up working out really well. I ended up doing a little bit more than a year long, but that's a whole different story. Maybe I'll do a complete different podcast on that. But the idea here was, the whole point of betting on myself was to say, how can I learn more insights so that I can start to take better, more decisive action based on the information that was coming in, because my information was at that point much more informed. And so my decisions also were becoming better. I had somebody that I could go to, that I knew that I didn't want to sit in a room. I didn't want to sit in a group at that point in time and listen to everybody else ask their questions. I wanted my specific questions, my specific context to be understood, so that I didn't have to re-explain it every single time. Like when I got on a phone call, it was understood. We knew what was happening and we knew where we were going, or where I was going, or what needed to happen. And so once was able to get there, then started to take the path. The interactions were exactly what I needed at that point in time. And you know what? Although I didn't get to the goal that I had planned on getting in 1 year, like pretty much failed that, right? It probably took almost twice that. But more importantly, even though I didn't get to the goal of making the investment in this 1-year coaching program, I knew that the idea that I had to be expanded on. I needed process. I needed structure. And so I was then able to take from that. And this is, I guess, the real lesson is, I followed an initial track of where I wanted to go. There was a clear path that was set out for me that I followed. I was able to identify the specific criteria to help me collapse timeframes to get to the result that I was looking for faster. Like I said, I didn't absolutely get there in the year that I thought it was going to happen. It took longer than that. However, I understood the process that I needed to follow in order to get what was there. And most importantly, for someone like me, recovering perfectionist at the time, always wanted to get everything right, had to wait for all these stoplights to be green before I moved. I realized that the power of having a positive idea, or having a really good idea, and having someone that I could spar with, when I asked myself the question, now what? It's about me recognizing, and I understood at that point in time, and that it was also about taking action, sometimes on imperfect information, versus thinking about things perfectly and moving super slow at a snail's pace. So whenever I ask the question, or whenever I make the recognition, like, you've created this amazing idea, now what? The answer is, figure out what's the most important for you. What's the next step that you need to take, and realize that you don't have to take the steps on your own. A lot of times when you want to, well, not a lot of times, really every single time that I've recognized, when you want to get to some place and there's someone who's been there before you, the best way for you to learn is to connect with that person, is to be able to learn from that person. And whether that person is putting out free YouTube videos or a podcast like this, when you have the opportunity to reach out to connect with them, that could be your opportunity to be able to move forward faster, get to the result today versus waiting over a decade like it took me. And that's the thing that you should start to say when you're asking yourself, now what? Because you've created this amazing idea, or you have this new business idea and you're moving in that direction. Now what means take more action over just completely thinking about it. So this is the process that I went through. I'm sure that you are going through something very similar, or you know somebody who's going through something similar. So if you are, and if you yourself, like, you want to listen to this again, definitely listen to it again. If you know somebody who could benefit from listening to today's episode, feel free to share it with them. And you know what you can do? You can get on a call with them, chat with them, go from theory to action to practicality. Like, that's the whole point. And so while you're sharing today's episode, I'll be here preparing for the next episode. So until then, go out and make it a great day. And thank you very, very much. Today's conversation was sponsored by the Billy Keels Advisory Program. If you're looking to make your 9-to-5 optional and need some help, just go to billykeels.com/advising. Once again, that's billykeels.com/advising.